Okay, so this is a video I've sort of been dreading doing for a while now, mainly because it's just as controversial as how strong is Itachi. But I know that at some point I had to make this video dedicated to Minato himself. So today I'm just going to put my opinion out there on how strong I think Minato is and if he's overrated or underrated. Before I start though, I want to make it clear that this is just my own opinion. Full disclosure, Minato is one of my favorite characters, so as much as I'm going to try to put my own biases outside of this video, horse! I realize that no matter what, I'll be getting hate on me for if I gas him up or not in this video just because he's a favorite. But at least on my side, I will do my best to be as objective as I possibly can. Horse! Honestly, I think the best place to start this video is by talking about how Minato was presented to us during part 1. Minato was introduced to us as a character with unquestionable power and skill. Straight from the first episode, Naruto and the third Hokage, through the prologue anyway, depicted Minato as being the best of the Hokage, or something along those lines. The next mention of him that we get is from Anko to Hiruzen in the Chunin exams, stating her belief that if the fourth Hokage was still alive, Orochimaru wouldn't even be a threat. And by this point, Orochimaru was on a god tier level compared to what we've seen prior. Speaking of Hiruzen, during the Orochimaru fight, after Tobirama and Hashirama were summoned by Edo Tensei, the third coffin was fast approaching and Hiruzen on the fly said, "I cannot let that third one come up." Sort of implying that Minato was the strongest of the Hokage. Now of course, we know that that's not necessarily the case now. Honestly, it could have been meant that with Minato's skill set added to the pressure of Hashirama and Tobirama, that the battle would have been even worse for Hiruzen, which it definitely would have been. As a matter of fact, even Hashirama and Tobirama's after their debut, Minato is still the only Hokage that's consistently being mentioned by others in the show, including both Jiraiya and Tsunade, and talking about how Minato was a prodigy like no other. Tsunade was more talking about the Rasengan being the fourth Hokage's jutsu and all, but you get the idea. Now, something that's important when referring to Part 1 statements and feats is that one could argue that they were done or made for a specific purpose. For example, at the time, Jonin were considered super elite ninja that were, for the most part, capable of handling most situations on their own. And it sort of stayed this way up to a certain point in Shippuden. Certain Jonin stayed pretty consistent to the idea that Jonin being the super elite ninja, such as Kakashi and Guy, but others became somewhat unreliable by the time of the Pain arc. Now, that's not to say that they didn't serve their purpose throughout the series, as we see plenty of Jonin characters put in work in the Five Kage Summit and War arc, but the point is that as the series went on, things that were established or implied tends to be diminished a bit. Same case could be made here with Minato. In his case, I think the mystery of Minato might have led to his hype in the beginning of the series, which would make sense. Naruto is clearly related to Minato somehow, to which most, if not all, fans could already guess. So the hype that surrounded Minato, on top of the way other characters in the show in Part 1, and even to some extent Shippuden talked about him, it's clear to see why some people might actually consider him the actual strongest Hokage. Especially since by the time of the Pain arc, we'd never even seen him at all, much less in action. Now, luckily for us, especially for the manga readers, not long after Part 1 and the manga wrapped up, we got the Kakashi guidance chapters, which finally gave us a surface level knowledge into Minato's skills and abilities. So to put this into perspective of someone like me who read the manga chapters as they came out, you spent all this time hearing how hyped and how strong Minato is, or is rumored to be. Then you finally get to see him in person, and a few minutes later you see how he actually fights for the first time. And what you are shown is a guy who can basically teleport to anywhere as long as he's marked it. And that's anything, anyone, ever. A rock, a tree, a foot. And even though we don't know it yet, the fact that the flying Raiji mark never disappears after it's marked is even more wild and efficient, especially in combat. And in that same fight, we see that Minato is able to put a mark on people with such finesse that most people, at least the Jonin in question, didn't even notice that he had been marked on his shoe, which of course gave Minato the element of surprise. And right before we see him make the killing blow, we are told that the entire village hidden in the stone issued a flee on sight warning on Minato. This means that whether he had seen or even just heard how Minato fights, Oniki, the Tsuchikage, as the one to tell his troops to run like hell if you see this man, not just encounter. And not too long after that, we are both shown and kinda told that Minato took care of the remaining enemy troops on the front lines with little to no difficulty, on top of taking care of all the Jonin that were sent to pursue Kakashi and Rin after Obito's death. So again, you're reading all this for the first time after spending so long hearing from other characters on how strong and skilled Minato was said to be, and then for it to be put on paper and shown to you in the same chapter to be told that an entire country feared this man. It's easy to see the hype that surrounded Minato and why many fans would consider him one of the strongest. Now conversely, the fact that Hashirama was the actual strongest Hokage, well, I mean, 1 through 5, there was no such hype around him until near the end of the series in general. There was a hint early on in Shippuden where it said that having his cells was something that, if successfully implanted, would enhance a person's overall capability as a ninja, including even giving them incredible healing factors and possibly even wood style. But other than that, it seems like everyone's viewpoint on what would be the pinnacle of a ninja was Minato himself. Now, granted, most of, if not all, the people that would talk of this way about Minato never really knew what Hashirama was actually capable of, but considering how much hype Hashirama got during the war arc, it's crazy to look back at how much, or rather how little, he was talked about. Especially considering when we end up getting a glimpse of his legendary opponent when we first see he and Madara's statue in the final valley. Now, when we take a look at how he stacks up against certain ninja in the series, we see all the talk about him from other characters isn't exactly all hot air. For example, Killer Bee and soon-to-be Raikage A were among the strongest during the Third Great Ninja War, to which very ninja could combat separately, let alone as a team. And then comes in Minato, who is already recognized by them on the spot, and tells his teammates not to engage them, that he'd be able to handle it. Minato then proceeds to counter the Raikage at his top speed at that time anyway, placing kunais all around the battlefield to teleport to, which he did so in a way of tricking him since he was able to swiftly and discreetly place a flying Raijin mark on Killer Bee. A had the notion that Minato would teleport to one of the kunais that he had placed around the forest, and Minato used that to his advantage to get the upper hand. Bottom line, even as early as his Jonin days, even if you want to lowball Minato and say he wasn't Kage level during that time, based on showings, it's very clear that he's at least able to deal with Kage level opponents. And if you really wanted to actually highball him, you honestly could say he reached the conclusion of Kage level at a really young age, like a really, really young age. Which again, based on how people would talk about him, is not totally out of the realm of possibility. Heck, even Hiruzen was made Kage at a really, really young age, likely even younger than Minato. When we get to the Minato one-shot manga, we're able to get more of a glimpse on how skilled he was, even without the flying Raijin. When I say without much help, I mean to say that he still has to use like hand signs in order to teleport, instead of using it on the fly like we're used to seeing him use it. We also see that this Minato, who is definitely younger than the one that fought A and B, can take a pretty good hit and withstand some serious damage. For example, when Kurama was rampaging inside Kushina and was making her change into the version 2 state, Kurama/Kushina pretty much put a hole through Minato's torso, and not only did Minato live, he still had enough energy and durability to combat the Nine Tails. Speaking of, even though it was an astral projection inside Kushina's mind, it's still crazy impressive that Minato, with just his Rasengan, was able to combat Kurama's Biju Bomb. Now, here's the thing. I've seen people make this scene out to mean that Minato, even at this age, was as strong or even maybe even stronger than the Sage Mode that fought Kurama in his own mind. And that's a bit up in the air for me. Well, at first glance, hearing people say this, you'd probably think, well, that doesn't sound right. Especially when considering how much Naruto had adapted and mastered Sage Mode by this point. But then when you take into account that Naruto fought only half of Kurama, and then he had help from Kushina's chains that at worst were slightly stronger than the ones she used to help Minato fight Kurama, and at best significantly stronger, since they kind of get stronger with age, and adding on that Minato also overpowered Kurama while severely damaged, it starts to seem more and more true. Now, I don't want to overhype him, and admittedly, if someone were to have just randomly told me this and I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, then I would say they're absolutely crazy. Especially when you consider all the statements by the time of the Pain arc that Naruto had surpassed his predecessors, including Minato. I've actually seen some people take this statement and tweak it a little bit and say that Fukasaku meant Jiraiya and Kakashi, and that he had not surpassed Minato yet, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. For one, Fukasaku barely knew Kakashi as it seems, and I don't think he knew much about Kakashi's abilities aside from the fact of his reputation as the copy ninja. But also, like, him talking about Minato was pretty much implied after Tsunade had a vision of both Jiraiya and Minato from seeing Naruto, and she did not have a vision of Kakashi, so again, that's pretty much implied she was thinking of Minato. But as it stands, based off the feats he pulled off in the one-shot manga, it does lend credence to the idea that Minato was in fact stronger, or at the very least, a more capable overall ninja than Naruto during his Kurama fight. Also, being that Kurama even compares Minato's potential to Hashirama's is definitely worth noting. I've come across some people saying that this meant that Minato is on the same par as Hashirama, and that's just not the case. Besides him saying that, I mean, it was pretty much in the same panels when he was talking about Minato's sealing capabilities, so I believe that's more what he was referring to, not overall Minato's strength. Now, his feats in the war arc outside of using KCM are actually pretty impressive. He doesn't have too many feats outside of KCM, but the ones that come to mind for me anyway is him being able to get to the battlefield before any of the Hokage, though some have speculated whether this was due to flying Raijin or his actual travel speed. But taking Tobirama's immediate mention of how Minato is better than flying Raijin than he is, it's safe to assume that Minato got there by teleportation. Another feat was that he sort of off-screen teleported the Ten Tails Biju Bomb away to the sea, and later on during Guy's fight with Madara, Minato was quick enough to teleport in front of the True Sig orbs Madara had aimed at Guy that weren't too far from Guy in the first place, and teleport away faster than Guy could get to Madara. Now, something that might get me into a little bit of trouble is when it comes to Minato's speed, I do think that people may have taken it out of context. For example, flying Raijin or teleportation in general isn't necessarily the same thing as travel speed or combat speed. Combat speed is more so how fast someone can throw hands. Travel speed is more how fast someone can run, like the Raikage does. Now, that's not to say that Minato isn't fast. He's the Yellow Flash, for crying out loud. But the thing is, we've never really seen how fast he is outside of teleporting. And just so people don't misunderstand me, I'm not talking about the body flicker into account when talking about this particular section. In my personal opinion, I think he's relative to War Kakashi in terms of speed, as far as travel speed anyway, which isn't bad at all considering Kakashi was fighting on par with 6th to 7th gate Guy in the War arc. When it comes to overall stats, strength, and abilities, if I had to say how strong he is comparing him to other characters, I say when it comes to the Akatsuki, aside from the big three, he no-diffs everybody in the Akatsuki, from Zetsu, Konan, Kakuzu, Deidara, Sasori, Hidan. When it comes to the big three though, I think that the person that he has the hardest time fighting is Pain. I've already done a video about this topic, so I'll leave a link for that in the description below. Same case with Itachi. I've already done a video discussing Minato versus Kakashi, so I'll do the same thing about that video as well. But what I will say is either way, it's not an easy fight for either combatant. However, Obito might be a little bit less difficult than he would, because we've already seen this happen. Though Orange Mask Obito is way stronger and way more experienced than the one that fought Minato during the Nine Tails attack. But aside from Wet Style and Kamui, he doesn't really have much in his arsenal that can put Minato down. But with him being better at Kamui at this point, there's a chance he could pull him in faster than he did in his first fight. When it comes to the Hokage, without getting into the Minato versus Tobirama section, because I plan on doing a video on that specifically, I think the Hokage that Minato definitely beats are Tsunade and Hiruzen, both prime and old age, but loses to Naruto, Hashirama, and Kakashi. Again, I'm not going to say who I think wins between Minato and Tobirama, you'll just have to stay tuned for that one. But that aside, I think that's where I would rank him amongst the Hokage. So to answer the question in today's topic, is Minato overrated or underrated? Honestly, I think he's fairly scaled, but I will lean slightly on the side of he's a bit too overhyped when it comes to how strong he was intended to be and how much stronger people like Hashirama and Madara actually ended up being. I will say that the Minato one-shot manga kind of perpetuated Minato in a class that I would never have thought he'd be in. And a part of me wants to say that might be what putting him in the overrated class. But either way, I mean, it did happen. So I guess my answer is that he is overrated a bit, but not by much. More so how much he was hyped in the beginning. But either way, there's no denying that he lived up to the hype that was given to him. Whether by the series itself or even on a meta level with how fans or have Kishimoto have talked about him. In the end, maybe it was the power creep in the latter part of the series that may have messed things up for how strong or weak characters are. In any case, that's going to be the video. I think Minato is incredibly impressive, and I do understand why people think he's a bit too hyped up, but it's also worth remembering how and why he was hyped up. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like the video if you haven't already. Be sure to smash the subscribe button and click the bell for more notifications in the future. And until my next one, LightningSnow.